I'm Megan Lee.
And I'm Peter DeLay from the Business Desk.
Coming up on our program, Germany celebrates the 20th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Chancellor Angela Merkel has been leading celebrations at the Brandenburg Gate, attended by a host of foreign dignitaries. Germans have also been remembering the 9th of November 1938, the night of broken glass, when the National Socialists launched a pogrom against the Jews. It's been 20 years since the fall of the Berlin Wall, and Germany has been marking that day with events and festivities. There was a reenactment of the fall of the wall, and heads of state and government gathered at the Brandenburg Gate right here in Berlin to celebrate the anniversary.
It was a day filled with symbolic acts, none more so than this. World leaders striding through the Brandenburg Gate. It's something that would have been impossible and unthinkable 20 years ago. Festivities reached their high point at the gate with music by Wagner, performed by the Berlin Staatskapelle. It was also a day of speeches. The representatives of the former Allied powers, France, Britain, the U.S., and Russia, voiced their sentiments on the anniversary. And then Chancellor Merkel relayed her own personal feelings from that day.
The wall was opened on this day 20 years ago, and with it, the gate to freedom and a seemingly unbreakable border that divided a people and a continent. Suddenly, it was crumbling. It was one of the happiest moments in my life.
Merkel also thanked neighboring countries to the east for their part in bringing down the wall. Former Solidarity leader and Polish President Lech Walesa was invited to give the first push to a wall of oversized dominoes erected in the city center. 1,000 of them had been painted by artists and school children from around the world. It ran along the former course of the wall between Potsdamer Platz and the German parliament. They fell one after the other. The Gate to Freedom was opened here in Berlin 20 years ago, and the city put on a fitting show for tens of thousands in honor of that day in November.
Well, my colleague Max Hoffman has been witnessing all of today's action down at the Brandenburg Gate and joins me now. Hi, Max. Now, we heard Angela Merkel speak in that last report. What did other leaders have to say?
Well, all the leaders talked about freedom and how important it was, and that we shouldn't stop now, but that the Berlin Wall and the fall of the Berlin Wall teaches us to tackle important topics and important issues of today, also like poverty in Africa, that's what Gordon Brown said, or environment, climate, and all these topics. So those speeches all centered around the topic of freedom, and all of them tried to fit in a little German also. So French President Sarkozy said, "Wir sind Berlin, we are Berlin."
Okay, now Max, you've been talking to a lot of people, you've been hearing a lot of their stories about where they were 20 years ago. Tell us briefly some of those things that you've heard.
A lot of people say never again. We're so happy that this happened, and we're so happy that the wall came down, that now we can live in a reunited Germany in freedom. We heard that a lot tonight, and this anniversary just brought back these memories and brought out these reactions, and I just think that's the way it should be. It's great to have such a celebration to remind people of what it was like, and just to be happy that it's different today.
Now, it certainly looks like things have been are winding down there behind you. What were your impressions of this evening's celebrations?
I thought it was a grand celebration. It was certainly the biggest celebration in honor of the fall of the wall we have had so far. It started off with, with a classical concert. We saw that in the report. What we didn't see is that there was a surprise appearance by Placido Domingo, who performed Das ist die Berliner Luft, that's the Berlin Air. That's a classic march from 1904, and that's when all the Berlin visitors here started clapping their hands, and even Secretary of State Hillary Clinton got in the groove, you know.
All right, then.
And
all right, Max.
And of course,
All right, we're going to leave it there for now. We're going to leave it there for now.
Dominoes.
Right. It seems like everybody was getting in the groove, including you, Max. But thank you very much for that update from the Brandenburg Gate. Well, celebrations are also underway at Marienburg-Helmstadt at the former checkpoint Alpha, which used to be the busiest crossing on the border between East and West Germany. Now, it was on the main highway between Western Europe and Poland and the Soviet Union, and on the transit route between West Germany and West Berlin. Up to 1,000 East German officials used to be on duty here. Now, the site is a memorial. And joining me now from that former checkpoint is DWTV's Georg Mattis. Georg, so what has been happening there today?
Well, the border is brightly lit, just like during the time some 20 years ago when it was daylight during night here, and when, as you said, 1,000 members of staff from security to police to customs officers were working here on a compound matching the size of 70 soccer fields. And on this compound, every single passport was controlled, and 5 out of 100 people were body searched, their cars were searched. And if you take that number and add it up to the millions of cars that went through here, it gives you a feeling of how high the security at this border crossing was. And it was some 15 minutes before the wall in Berlin came down that the first car entered from east to west on this checkpoint.
Now, Georg, Max Hoffman, who's at the Brandenburg Gate, was just telling us some of the stories that he's been hearing all day from people who came back to witness some of these celebrations. What are you hearing from people where you are about their experiences?
Yeah, a lot of people here, of course, remember the night when the border finally opened here. And I have to say, I took a tour yesterday, and I think it's only when you grasp the terror and the sinister atmosphere that went out from this border checkpoint that you really understand how it felt for them when they could simply drive down the A2 as though they were Allied forces and could simply drive down the motor highway into Western Germany. And it was that feeling of joy that one can grasp once one understands how serious this huge border was. And there was a big party here tonight, about 1,500 guests. There was music, and I really have to say that the aim of this border crossing, of this memorial site,
all right, Georg, I'm sorry.
has absolutely been achieved.
Sorry about that. I have to leave it there for now. Georg, thank you very much for that update from former checkpoint Alpha. Well, DWTV is following the celebrations to mark the 20th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Live from Berlin, we're broadcasting 24-hour coverage of the event from different locations around the capital in German and in English. Now, we've got 2 studios set up at the heart of the action, making this the biggest special in the history of DWTV. Stay tuned for our in-depth report on the celebrations coming up later in the program.
20 years ago, exactly.
Well, November 9th is also a significant day in another part of German history. 71 years ago, on November 9th, 1938, the Nazis staged state-sanctioned anti-Jewish riots. Now, this night became known as Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass. Thousands of Jewish businesses were looted, while hundreds of synagogues and homes were plundered or destroyed. The night marked an intensification of anti-Jewish policy in Germany.
While many Berliners joyfully commemorated the fall of the wall, this more somber ceremony recalled an earlier November 9th in German history. Several thousand young people took part in a candlelit procession in memory of the Kristallnacht pogrom.
20 years ago, the gates to freedom were opened. 71 years ago, we saw the doors of Auschwitz beginning to open, which is why it's essential that this country acknowledges its past, even on such a joyous day.
On November 9, 1938, Nazis killed hundreds of Jews and ransacked synagogues, homes, and businesses. About 30,000 Jewish men were arrested. Many were sent to concentration camps. November 9th is an emotionally complicated day. But as the German Chancellor said, both anniversaries show that freedom is not self-evident, but must be fought for and defended.
Time now to check in with Peter for other stories making headlines today.
That's true. Business does go on. Indeed, Megan, well, British chocolate maker Cadbury's has rejected a hostile €11 billion takeover bid from America's Kraft Foods. Cadbury's says that the bid did not come remotely close to the company's true value. Currency fluctuations actually made this bid less than the friendly bid that was rejected in September. Cadbury's is mostly known for its chocolate bars. Kraft Foods says that if the takeover is successful, the combined company will have revenue of €33 billion, and it will be the largest sweet producer in the world with a 15% market share. Kraft currently makes Oreo cookies, Nabisco crackers, and cheese. On to the markets now. European share prices were up on Monday following pledges by G20 nations to keep the financial aid flowing until economic recovery is assured. In Frankfurt, the blue chip DAX index closed nearly 2.5% higher at 56.19. The Eurostoxx 50 index ended the day 2.3% in positive territory. And New York investors there have jolted stocks to fresh highs for the year. The Dow Industrials also closed over 2% higher. Finally, the euro is trading for $1.4994 U.S. cents. Well, for a closer look at the trading day in New York City, I spoke earlier with our correspondent there, Jens Korda, and we asked him what was really driving the rally today.
Well, we saw some reaction to the G20 meeting from the past weekend. We saw quite some pressure on the US dollar, and that was one reason why commodities traded sharply higher, and pretty much almost all of the Dow 30 stocks traded to the upside, with the exception of Kraft trying to do a hostile takeover of Cadbury, so that put some pressure on the Kraft stock. But besides that, all stocks on the Dow Jones Industrial Average traded to the upside. And by the way, it's been already the 16th day this year that the Dow could gain by more than 200 points on one day. It's a new year high here on Wall Street, so it was a rather strong start to the week.
Jens Korda in New York. Jens, thank you very much for that update. And China says that it will double investments in Africa in an attempt to keep the momentum of trade with that continent. China is now ahead of the U.S. in total trade with Africa. It also needs raw materials to feed its industrial expansion.
China is providing €10 billion in loans to Africa, lower export duties to the continent, and it's forgiving the debts of some of the poorest nations there. Investing in Africa has become a standard feature of Beijing's foreign policy.
Because of the financial crisis, international investment has been on the decline. But in the first 3 quarters of this year, China increased its investments by more than 77% in Africa.
The aid is earmarked for infrastructure investment and social projects. Africa is one of China's most important sources of raw materials, as well as a growing market for Chinese products. Trade volumes between the two have increased by a factor of 10 since 2001. Last year, trade was worth more than €67 billion. But China's involvement in Africa has also drawn criticism abroad. Beijing is accused of ignoring human rights violations in states that it does business with, including pursuing arms deals with war-torn Sudan.
Megan.
Thank you very much for that, Peter. Hurricane Ida has weakened to a tropical storm as it moves towards the U.S. Gulf Coast. It's expected to make landfall between Louisiana and Florida early on Tuesday. Meanwhile, rescue workers in El Salvador have been searching for people lost in mudslides triggered by heavy rains over the weekend. Dozens of residents of San Vicente Verapaz are still missing after part of the town was swept away. The rains began Saturday night as Ida moved along the Caribbean coast of Central America. Iran has said that it still wants talks on fuel supplies for its disputed nuclear program. Now, this comes in spite of an apparent rejection of recent UN plans to limit Iran's access to uranium. Iran's top nuclear negotiator, Saeed Jalili, on the right, said that Iran welcomes talks with world powers. Jalili met with the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister, Sergei Ryabkov, earlier on Monday. The UN has offered Iran a deal which could provide it with uranium fuel rods enriched abroad, but Iran has not yet accepted it. Now back to our top story, the anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And Germans aren't the only ones marking the 20 years since the end of the division of Europe. We take a look now at some of the celebrations taking place from London to Korea.
These students in the Polish capital, Warsaw, are much too young to be able to remember the Berlin Wall. Still, they celebrated their own festival of freedom on this important anniversary. In Nicosia, the divided capital of Cyprus, school children on the Greek Cypriot side commemorated the fall of the wall with a procession. At the barrier Israel has built around or in parts of the West Bank, Pink Floyd singer Roger Waters left a message.
Maybe a lot harder to get this one down, but eventually it has to happen. Otherwise, there's no point in being human beings.
In Rome, an Italian artist has built a replica of the Berlin Wall on the Spanish Steps to evoke the feeling of segregation and separation Berliners suffered for 28 long years.
Stay tuned to The Journal. I'll be back after a short break with the in-depth report and more on commemorations celebrating 20 years since the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Yeah, don't go away.
New at DW Store, the DVD on the 20th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. With an exciting documentary about this historical event. Super realistic 3D animation of Germany's internal border. And exclusive bonus material. The DVD Walled In. New at DW Store. November 9th, 2009. 20 years since the fall of the Berlin Wall, the historic anniversary. We are there, live, around the clock, with special programs and documentaries. 20 years since the fall of the Berlin Wall. Following Journal In Depth, we'll continue broadcasting live.
The mood in Berlin has been emotional and festive, to say the very least. The city has been marking 20 years since the fall of the Berlin Wall, with thousands of tourists and former East Berliners recounting their stories of that fateful night on November 9th, 1989, a defining moment in German history. Chancellor Angela Merkel, along with numerous dignitaries, have been taking part in ceremonies all day long. Highlights included an evening reenactment of the fall of the wall, as well as a concert at the historic Brandenburg Gate. Here's a look now at some of Monday's celebrations.
The fall of the wall, take two. And once again, it was met with cheers. Thousands of dominoes toppling across former East and West Berlin, symbolizing the fall of the Berlin Wall. Tens of thousands came to Berlin to remember a great moment in German, European, and world history. Among them, the heads of state of all 27 EU member states, the Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, and U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
History broke through concrete and barbed wire and signaled a new dawn, not just for the people of Berlin, not just for the people of Germany, but for the entire world.
It was a long day of large and small festivities in Berlin. They started at a former border crossing, now a wall memorial, in Bernauer Straße in the morning.
The fall of the wall, as well as the anniversary today, is one of the greatest things in my life.
Later, Chancellor Merkel walked across the Bornholmer Bridge with former Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. The bridge was a border crossing, the first to allow East Berliners into the West on the 9th of November, 1989. Merkel was there herself on the day.
I wasn't far. 104 Schönhauser Allee was just around the corner.
Merkel talked with former human rights campaigners. She said their important role in the history of former East Germany will not be forgotten.
Lost chances in life, fear and worry, punishing entire families for the actions of one. It's very hard to look back on all that and accept it. That's why everyone who's here could tell a long story about their contribution to freedom.
In the evening, Berlin hosted a party at Brandenburg Gate. Conductor Daniel Barenboim and the Staatskapelle Berlin Orchestra performed for the hundreds of thousands there to celebrate. Even the rain didn't dampen the spirits of the crowd or opera legend Placido Domingo.
Now, most people were taken by surprise when the Berlin Wall fell on November 9th, 1989. Despite signs of change across the communist Eastern Bloc, few expected the Iron Curtain to be brought down with such speed. Former West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl wasn't even in the country at the time. And even more unusual is that many people attributed the collapse of the wall to a blunder made by a member of the East German Politburo, Günter Schabowski. We look now at the events leading up to a night in Berlin that changed the course of history.
Even late in the afternoon of November 9th, there was no indication this day would go down in history. The Central Committee of the East German Communist Party held a crisis meeting as it had the day before. Then, at a press conference in the evening, the bombshell was dropped.
Private journeys abroad can be applied for without preconditions, justifications, or proof of family ties. The permits will be granted at short notice.
Starting when, someone asked?
As far as I know, it takes effect immediately.
The border crossings in Berlin were still being guarded as usual. East Germans had to apply for a permit to travel. But what exactly did the announcement at the press conference mean? For the main evening news show on West German television, it was clear East Germany opens its borders. Though they couldn't be seen from the west, East Berliners started to gather at the Bornholmer Strasse crossing within half an hour. Soon there were thousands, and they chanted, "Open the gate." When the news reached the West German parliament in Bonn, its members spontaneously stood up and sung the national anthem.
My mother and father are over there. Can I go across now and see my parents?
First, a few people crossed from east to west Berlin at Bornholmer Strasse. Then the crowd pressed forward. The border could no longer be held. And that is how it started. All Berlin was soon overwhelmed by joy and something like disbelief.
Nobody could have dreamed we would live to see this.
People were partying on the streets in West Berlin, on Kurfürstendamm, and in front of the Brandenburg Gate on the west side of the wall. The symbol of the Cold War ceased to intimidate. Thousands of West Berliners stormed the wall. And as it was breached, the fate of East Germany was also sealed on the night of November the 9th, 1989.
The repercussions of the fall of the wall were felt around the world. We asked people in London, Jerusalem, Washington, and Moscow what comes to mind when they think of that momentous occasion in Berlin 20 years ago, and also how they feel about it today.
Oh yay! Oh yay! Welcome to London! London calling to the faraway towns. Now war is declared and battle come down.
20 years, I would never have believed it. I would have said 5 if you'd said how long ago. 20 years is amazing.
I remember being terribly emotional about it on the on the day and watching it on the news and thinking, whoa, this is really something special happening.
It's a great achievement, not just for Germany, but for the world in itself.
I have the feeling that since then, everything's become better in Berlin and in Germany. I now feel much more positive about Germany.
We also have a wall. Nobody knows what the future will bring, but I hope the wall that divides Israelis and Palestinians will soon fall.
I remember feeling the emotion at the time of what a wonderful time it was for the German people, in my mind, yes.
It does seem to me that it's a good thing that the country has been reunified, that it's done good things, I think, for European unity, for the prospects for peace in the future.
Germany's been united, but unfortunately, the Soviet Union broke apart.
I congratulate the German people in East and West on the occasion of this happy anniversary. All the best, good luck, peace, and prosperity.
Well, official festivities marking 20 years since the fall of the Berlin Wall have now finished here in the German capital. But of course, the celebrations continue. And after the weather, we will be continuing our special coverage of the historic event. So stay with DW TV if you can. I'm Megan Lee. That wraps up the Journal at this hour.
The weather forecast for Germany. Overcast skies will bring rain to most of the country. Only eastern regions will stay dry, with daytime highs between 6 and 8 degrees Celsius. Not much change in the weather over the next few days. Cloudy skies and rain expected through Friday. Elsewhere in Europe, cloudy in most areas with heavy rain in central regions. Only the Black Sea still has summery temperatures. Now here's the forecast for selected cities around the world.